Well, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for coming to this symposium on collective efforts. I would like to say a few very short words just before we start, and then I will give the stage to Wayne, and then Marcel will talk, and then Olle will close our session. So the notion of effort is a central concept in many disciplines, including psychology, economics, and even in some aspects of legal theory. It underlies our judgments of agency and intentionality often, where the sense of agency is associated with us feeling some kind of effort. And it also underlies some judgments about ownership and rights about when we make an effort to do something, then we can state that we have some kind of claim of ownership to it. And so the problem is that the notion of effort, we still don't have a fully developed philosophical account of. And that is something that as philosophers we have started to grapple with. And that's a fruitful area of research right now coming up. But many of the efforts that we perform are actually embedded in a larger collective project in which we try to make efforts together to, for example, raise children together, or we make efforts to try to score goals as a team and beat an opponent team, or we make collective efforts to put together a big international conference and a big symposium like this one. So the idea of collective efforts is an upcoming topic of research as well in the realm of social ontology. And I'm very excited to present to you three researchers who are doing cutting edge research in this regard. The idea for this symposium is that we have this open discussion with interdisciplinary researchers so that we can see and try to build bridges between different approaches to the topic. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Wayne Christensen. Wayne is postdoctoral researcher at the University of Barcelona, and he's working in the Rethinking Conscious Agency project. He has written papers on the biological sources of normativity and the nature of mind reading, and has a series of very influential papers on the philosophy of skill and expertise. And I'm very excited to introduce Wayne to you. He will talk to us today about the sense of effort, joint action, and the evolution of flexible skill. So Wayne, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'll just try to share my screen here. I have it as host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Let me try to solve that one. Sorry, I should have anticipated that. So let me allow all participants to share the screen. Okay, now it should be working.
Okay, let's see what I have to allow my computer to do it, to tell my...
You're still not allowed to share your screen?
Oh no, it's asking me, it's telling me I have to quit Zoom in order to share my screen. So I'll have to quit and then rejoin. I'll try and do that very quickly.
That shouldn't be an issue. Or would that be, is there anything we can do on the side? If I name you the host of the meeting, perhaps it can help, you think, or is it a problem with your computer?
It's just, I've got to change the permissions
yeah.
to allow
I had the same problem when I did my first Zoom talk. I also had to do this. So I think it may not be possible.
I'll just quickly do that now.
Okay.
Okay.
See you very soon.
Maybe the other speakers should do that too already to try to prevent that from happening to them.
And Marcel, you want to check whether screen sharing is working?
Yes, I can have a go. I think it will work because I've already tried it. Do you
Okay,
see
that's
it?
perfect. It's working for you, Marcel. And Ale, you want to, Ole, you have a PowerPoint perhaps you want to?
Yeah, I will try. Let's see. Yeah.
Excellent.
That works.
Good.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, everything okay?
Yeah, we see you.
Great.
Great.
Works.
Great, good. So you're seeing my slides okay now?
Yeah. Yeah, it works
Right.
perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, thanks very much. Apologies for the slight glitch there. This is a little bit more of a work in progress than I'd hoped it would be, but hopefully it'll all make sense. The central theme that I'm going to argue for is that effort control plays a central role in flexible skilled action, both individual and collective. And as such, it's likely to exhibit the following characteristics. It'll involve high order representations, that is abstract representations that integrate diverse sources of information, and high order control. That is, it'll involve control of multiple resources, control for high level variables, and control for different target variables depending on circumstances. Now, I'm going to argue that current approaches don't fully reflect the likely complexity of effort awareness and control, and I'll suggest some phenomena that may be worth investigating. So I'm not going to say that current approaches are sort of on the wrong track, but rather that we need to build on them and extend them. And I'll try and buttress the significance of some of the things that I'm pointing to by appealing to some features of human evolution. Okay, all right, so first I'm just going to look at, take a very quick tour through some very selected examples of research on sense of effort and comment on them in relation to flexible skill. So we can first up distinguish between sense of effort in terms of muscular effort. And here there's a salient distinction between, as it were, central effort and peripheral outcomes. So at least one researcher, Carson et al., distinguishes between the sense of force. So you generate a particular amount of effort in order to produce a particular amount of force. And the amount of, as it were, central effort varies in order to achieve a particular amount of force. And so accordingly, according to these researchers, we should distinguish between sense of force and sense of effort, and see sense of effort as a way of achieving particular amounts of force. Then there's cognitive effort, which is associated with difficult attention demanding tasks. And it's thought that cognitive effort is tracking some kind of cost, but it's not entirely clear, or it's controversial just what kind of cost it might be tracking. So one view is the now somewhat notorious blood glucose theory, which holds that exerting self-control depletes blood glucose, and reducing effort is a way of conserving this resource. So the idea is that exerting effort is aversive, and the explanation for that is that you typically want to conserve that resource. Now, there are criticisms of this approach. So motivation can counteract, increasing motivation can counteract depletion, but there's no explanation within the theory for that. Blood sugar decreases in response to task demands are too small to account to explain the performance declines. And most important of all, the findings aren't robust. So an alternative theoretical approach that's been put forward is the opportunity cost theory. So Kurtzbahn et al. Here the idea is that when you're performing a task, the potential benefit of ending the task to perform some other task is computed. So tasks feel effortful when there is some other more desirable task available to be performed. And furthermore, the system is claimed to be biased towards valuing short-term benefits, which explains why persistent effort becomes increasingly aversive. Now, this in turn faces some criticisms. It assumes that there are no metabolic constraints on cognition, which seems implausible on the face of it. It can't explain effort control that doesn't involve task switching. So for example, Christian Schrader point to the phenomenon of reducing immediate effort in order to promote endurance and increase the likelihood of achieving the goal of the task you're actually now performing. So here the task, it feels effortful and you reduce your effort, but you're not aiming to switch. You're actually aiming to increase the likelihood of achieving the goal you're currently aiming at. The theory can't explain why fatigue would prompt avoidance of effortful tasks in general. So the theory just basically is a task specific. So it says, okay, this task is feeling effortful because there are other nicer tasks that are possible. But when you're fatigued, you'll in general not want to perform other difficult tasks, regardless of the nature of the rewards associated with those tasks. Furthermore, one of our most distinctive species features is the ability to achieve long-term goals. And that's a bit of a puzzle if we're cognitively biased towards short-term goals. Now, a revised energy theory has been put forward by Christian Schrader. This holds that effort is associated with sense of effort is associated with the recruitment of neurons, which depletes energy stored as blood glucose and astrocytic glycogen. So in other words, there are two available stores of energy, both blood glucose and astrocytic glycogen. And immediate effort demands can be satisfied by astrocytic glycogen. And fatigue is a signal of impending depletion rather than actual depletion. Now, advantages of the theory include that it explains the weak effects of task performance on blood sugar level, weak effects of reduced blood sugar level on task performance. It allows a more fine-grained explanation of resource costs associated with cognitive control. It explains how motivational increases can temporarily improve performance because there is still energy available. It's what fatigue is signaling is impending depletion. Furthermore, I think this is one of the most attractive features of the theory, is it provides a natural link between cognitive and muscular effort. They're both forms of resource management problem, and they're both linked. So in many complex tasks, you're involving both muscular effort and cognitive effort, and you can be needing to be interrelating those two forms of effort. Now, nonetheless, I think there are some problems with this theory as well. Effort control must manage multiple resources. So again, this is specifically just focused on metabolic energy, but effort control is going to need to manage multiple kinds of resource, including cognitive computational forms of resource, and sense of effort representations probably reflect this. So there probably isn't, I would suggest, a single resource that is the object of sense of effort. So to get some kind of clues as to the likely nature of kind of effort representations and some of their complexity, we can look at cognitive control, flexibility, and effort, and look at some of the kinds of effort control problems that are going to arise. So sense of effort is likely to play a central role in cognitive control and flexible skilled action, where cognitive control is flexible goal-directed cognitive processes involved in controlled attention and working memory. So looking at some effort control problems that are going to arise, one kind of effort control problem is the calibration of effort to produce a particular result. So for example, smoothly lifting a heavy box, finishing in the top 10 of a cycling race, completing shopping in time to get home to watch a sports event, preparing a talk for a conference, an example that hits home at the moment. Now, in order to perform effectively this kind of effort control, effort representations are going to need to include quite a variety of information. So they should include task structure, different kinds of effort, the range of effort levels that can be produced, endurance at particular effort levels, and effort outcome relations. Furthermore, these various kinds of information need to be integrated in effort control. So we could think here of them all as contributing to the awareness of an effort envelope. So an effort envelope tells you sort of how much, what kind of information you can, what kind of effort you can exert over how long in order to achieve particular goals. And that kind of information then can allow you to flexibly adjust effort levels, switch between goals, and so on. So another kind of effort control problem is goal evaluation and task switching. So examples would include continuing to work on a talk versus having an exercise session. Excuse me. Continuing whether to include, continue training for an Ironman event where what you're wondering is whether it's really worth putting in all that effort for the outcome. Maybe you're thinking, I don't really want to perform run an Ironman after all. Considering whether to abandon a paper after several rejections. Considering whether to apply for a grant. So here, effort representations are going to need to include task structure again, and in particular, effort outcome reward relationships. Now, yet another kind of effort control problem is method evaluation and modification. So some examples here would include discovering that altering your riding position while cycling to move your riding position forward makes climbing hills easier and faster. Considering whether to devote more or less time to technical exercises when learning a musical instrument. In other words, do you just want to learn tunes, or do you want to devote some amount of your practice time to technical exercises which might improve your underlying skill ability? In the context of, say, writing a joint paper, considering whether to continue weekly meetings or work separately for a while on a joint paper. Now here, representations again include task structure, quality of the outcomes, and efficiency of effort means outcome relations. So in sum, what I want to suggest is that there are a variety of forms of effort control problems. They require rich, diverse kinds of information. Furthermore, those kinds of information need to be integrated. And it's likely, I want to suggest, that effort representations reflect this. So effort aware, we can talk, I don't want to actually sort of, plumb the depths of questions about the phenomenology of effort here. But I want to suggest that effort awareness is going to have a much richer, more complex structure than just sense of exertion. So that's the thing you might think of sort of might spring to mind most immediately when you think of effort is the feeling of exerting it. But here I'm suggesting that effort awareness is going to be much richer than that. So with that in mind, let's turn to collective effort and consider a couple of strands of research on collective effort. First up, there's research on motivation to collaborate in collectives. So here, key piece of research is the collective effort model. And this research is sort of focused on understanding circumstances in which social loafing does or does not occur. And according to the collective effort model, people will exert effort on a collective task when they value the outcome personally and their contribution is instrumental to the outcome as they perceive it. And in terms of instrumentality, they say an individual's expectancy that their efforts will be useful. It's going to be influenced by a number of factors, including the nature of the task, member skills and abilities, goal setting, self-efficacy, self-esteem, understanding the requirements of successful performance, provision of necessary resources, match between individual personality. Now, some criticisms, and in part this is not a criticism, it's just to say that there's kind of other things we want to know about. The collective effort model doesn't address the structure of effort control that aims at effective collaboration. So here what I'm thinking of is where the question is not, do I loaf or not? But where I'm aiming to collaborate, but what I want to know is how do I collaborate? What's the most effective way to collaborate? And goal and method evaluation is going to be critical to that. So in collaborating, I want to be able to identify the best ways to channel my efforts into collective action. And that awareness is likely to be key to collective decision making. Okay, how should we all act together? Now, to some extent, I'm just looking at a different question to what the question of the collective effort model is concerned with. But these questions of efficacy have implications for motivation. So one prediction that I would put forward, which isn't directly made by the collective effort model, is that inefficient methods are likely to be demotivating. Okay, so I'll turn now to a shared different strand of research, the shared effort model. So this is modeled by Santa Maria and Rosenbaum. And what they propose is that when acting collectively, agents direct effort to ensure collective efficiency. That is, they're trying to ensure that total effort expended is less than what the sum of individual efforts would be if performed in an uncoordinated way. So the very simple example that they investigate is holding a door open for others. And they propose that an individual who's holding a door open for people following them should be willing to hold the door open for longer when there are more followers. And followers should be willing to speed up. And they conducted a simple study in which they found this was indeed the case. A very intuitive result. Turek et al. 2019, very much in the same vein, conducted a study using a touchscreen task in which, in the joint version of the task, one of the participants had to move a soccer ball to the gap where it would be picked up by the second participant and moved to the endpoint location. What they found was the participant who made the initial choice, chose to optimize overall efficiency of movement as opposed to minimizing their own movement. Again, that's straightforward and intuitive. Now, some criticisms. Well, there's a tension between these mean, and again, these aren't really criticisms, they're just asking for more. There's a tension between these two lines of research. On one hand, the social loafing research is finding that social loafing is common. On the other hand, this line of research is finding that people are spontaneously acting to achieve collective efficiency at personal cost. Now, a comment or a request for more information with respect to the shared efficacy model is that group efficiency is going to take highly varied forms, and effort control should reflect this. So equal force, for example, is not equal effort when the pair is a child and an adult. So you won't be ensuring a efficient, globally efficient outcome by trying to equalize force if you have agents with dissimilar strength. Local group efficiency is not always going to be globally efficient, and you can balance effort across multiple activities and over long periods of time. So in other words, efforts achieving group efficiency may be exceedingly complex. What's more, this, again, it's not a really criticism of the model, it's just saying there's more to effort control that we need to understand. We should distinguish between group efficiency and group efficacy. And group efficacy is often going to be a target of effort control that's distinct from group efficiency. So here what I have in mind by group efficacy is directing effort to goals that maximize group benefit, regardless of whether the means is efficient. Directing effort to maximize the likelihood of achieving group goals. So again, what I'm sort of trying to suggest here is that effort control is going to be pretty complex, and it involves quite abstract, high-order control that operates over a number of different kinds of problems. So I'll just try and now very quickly sort of reinforce the significance of that point by pointing to a few features of human evolution. So first, there's the fitness interdependence hypothesis. So two or more individuals have fitness interdependence when they influence each other's reproductive success. Now, Roberts and a number of others have argued that interdependence supports cooperative behavior. So the classic theories of cooperation were kin theory and reciprocity, but interdependence can take, so those are forms of interdependence, but interdependence can take other forms as well. So there can be indirect benefits from sort of group membership. So for example, predator vigilance, collective support of young are all ways that an individual can benefit from the group without getting direct reciprocity. Now, group life in human evolution probably involves very high levels of interdependence. And that implies that free riding is not the critical threat to cooperation that it's sometimes been taken to be, as pointed out by Sterelny and Tomasello and colleagues, which suggests that with respect to the evolution of effort control, one of the central problems that effort control has been aimed at for collective effort is how to cooperate effectively, not whether to cooperate. So in other words, you really want to work well with your group. The question is, how do you do it? So this kind of reinforces the emphasis that I was driving at earlier on goal and method evaluation. So you don't want to just be generally cooperating on anything. You want to be cooperating on the good things, the things that pay off. Now, in human evolution, you can see at least three kinds of abilities that have become greatly enhanced. So there's increase in foraging sophistication, ability to cope with varied conditions and varied ecologies, increasing technological sophistication, ability to construct and use diverse, complex, precisely structured artifacts, and increasing social sophistication. So cohesive small groups, family units, extended child dependency, so the ability to cooperate to support a child for long periods of time, and larger scale community organization. Now, those abilities have implications for understanding effort control. In fact, increasing capacity for effort control is probably central to human evolution. So it's likely to involve increasing sensitivity to efficacy and efficiency of goals and methods, increasing capacity for precisely structured effort to achieve complex, precise outcomes, increasing capacity to direct substantial effort over long periods of time. So again, somewhat contrary to the opportunity cost theory here. In fact, really what's distinctive about humans is the ability to direct effort for long periods of time. Yeah. So to sum up, I think what would be nice to have would be a general framework for understanding effort control in both individual and joint cases. Now, I've been suggesting that high order representations and high order control are likely to be characteristic of effort control. And that helps us, that takes us a step towards building a more generalized framework. So effort control is a pretty flexible capacity. We can reconcile metabolic and computational theories of effort representation by recognizing that effort representations probably encompass multiple resources. We should distinguish between motivational problems about whether to collaborate from efficacy and efficiency problems about how to collaborate, while at the same time recognizing those are very closely interconnected. And the capacities to solve these problems probably rely on a fairly elaborate, interconnected set of adaptations for effort awareness and management. Okay, so that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Now we are opening the floor for questions. So you can click on participants and raise your hand, and I will monitor who is raising the hand, and I'll give you the turn. Or you can write your question via the chat. So Anna Strasser has already asked a question. So Wayne, would you like to tackle that question first?
Sure. Yeah.
Hi, Wayne.
Hi. Hi, Anna.
So should I reread my question to make it more lively?
Sure, go ahead.
So you're saying in your theory that the sense of effort is something what is context sensitive, and I totally agree with that. And I was wondering, listening what you're saying, whether your approach can also explain how I can change your sense of effort to make sure that our joint action is continued. I mean, it's not about just sensing your sense of effort, but changing your sense of effort. Do you think this is possible, and how would you explain that?
Do you mean changing representation of actually like effort levels, or how to control effort? So for example, sorry, carry on.
Just to give you an example, so if I'm trying to have a joint action with my daughter, sometimes I have to motivate her, and so I have to manipulate her sense of effort to make her stick at the action.
Yeah, I guess there's at least two. Well, there's probably two related issues. One is influencing another person's awareness of how much effort is needed for in a particular joint activity. But you might also influence someone's sense of how effortful that effort is, if you like, if I can put it like that, in terms of, you know, calibration of or normative levels of effort. So, so if you're just, say, joining a cycling group, you're not much of a cyclist, and you're you have a level of riding that you find quite effortful, and you join this group and you discover that they're much fitter and they train much harder than you are. Initially, the level of effort that they're exerting is going to seem exorbitant to you, but if you persist with this group and train with them, your calibration of effort is going to, the norm level will shift. So you'll become acclimated to just much higher levels of training, you'll achieve higher levels of fitness, and that's normative level, that level of activity won't seem as excessive as it used to. So I guess both, you can both directly influence the you know, how much effort to do, but also over the longer run, how effortful is that effort? Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions? Yeah, Olivier.
Thanks a lot, Wayne, for that very nice presentation. This is a kind of naive question about exactly what the explanandum here is. So you have been talking about efforts and representation of efforts. At some time you say you wanted to understand what efforts are. At some other point you wanted to understand what the representations of efforts are. I thought that when you contrasted representation of effort with representation of forces, the picture I would tend to endorse is there are the forces and then there are the representation of the forces. And then perhaps a further question is, what is the function of representing those forces? And I think the same should be done in principle for efforts. So there is a question of what are efforts, then there is a question of how do we represent efforts, and then there is a further question of why do we represent efforts, and why do we what do we make of those representation for collective efforts, for effort control, and so on. Would you agree with that way of presenting things, or do you want to put emphasis rather on the effort representation as the target phenomenon here and as the most basic phenomenon, and then after I need to understand what effort is?
No, I think I agree with you. I want to distinguish between representations of effort and objective effort. So, you know, perhaps objective effort is something like work capacity. So the ability. So one way to try to define it, say, would be just the ability to do work, and then your effort representations are representing your capacity to do work and helping to direct the work that you perform. Does that?
Excellent. Yeah, that helps a lot. And if I may add just a comment on Pablo, then on the effort representation, then would you agree that there is a distinction between what's the nature of the effort representation is? So according to you now, a representation of your capacity to do work. So that question is basically solved. What is the representation of an effort? Is the representation of your capacity to do work. But then the question you seem to me to be interested in is, why do we represent that capacity to do work? What do we make with that? How we use that to assess the further effort we want to make or reassess other options for action and so on? Is that also a distinction you would agree to make between the nature of the representation of effort and the function of the representation of effort?
Yes, because the representations of effort are going to be fragmentary, and they'll need to. So I think it's unlikely that there would be a kind of just a single consolidated representation of effort as such. Rather, we're tracking different cues to effort, and some of those cues are more effective for some problems in some contexts than in other contexts. So effort representation is always going to be partial, and the partiality of it is going to be structured in different ways for different problems, I guess.
Excellent, thanks. This helps a lot. Thanks, Wayne.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. So John Michael has a question.
Hey, Wayne.
Hi, John.
Thanks for the great talk. So a number of the representations that you point out as being important for a sense of effort are pretty sophisticated, possibly uniquely human, like representing complex tasks, structures, anticipating how kinds and amounts of effort are going to change over the course of an activity. And so I'm wondering to what extent you think the sense of effort is uniquely human, or what could it look like in other animals that don't have the abilities that we have to represent complex task structures? So to what extent might our sense of effort build on something that's shared with other animals, or is there just no point to having a sense of effort at all if you can't have one as sophisticated as we humans might?
Oh yeah, no. I think it's very much building on capacities that are evolutionarily deep. So one of the canonical forms of effort management problem is going to be foraging. So sort of moving about in your environment in order to obtain different food sources, avoid predators and so on. So in human evolution, foraging ability becomes increasingly sophisticated. So we can, indicating that we can solve more complex foraging problems than other animals, but it's undoubtedly building on sort of capacities that are sort of used for solving foraging problems in other animals. So yeah, I think sense of effort, I mean, even, trading off different representing task structure is going to be to some extent present in a wide range of animals, sort of assessing, how much effort to exert for a particular goal is going to be pretty widespread in animals. So yeah, I think it's where what you see with us is dramatic elaboration of these abilities, but not the origination of these abilities.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks for this super interesting talk. It's time for us to go to the second talk of the symposium, which is in charge of Marcell Székely. So Marcell is a PhD candidate at the Central European University's Zombie Lab, where he works with John Michael and others, and has participated as co-author and as first author in groundbreaking papers on the role of collective effort in social coordination. Today, Marcell will give a talk entitled Social Effort Calibration. So Marcell.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. So in my research project, I'm investigating why we measure interaction partners' effort investment. So imagine that we are lifting a sofa together and I perceive you investing a higher or lower level of effort than me. Should this matter? The null hypothesis suggests that it shouldn't, After all, the perception of a joint action partner's effort should not lead to any changes in one's effort investment, except insofar as the partner's effort level influences task demands. People should invest effort according to the expected reward value of the task. But intuitively, partner's effort does seem to matter. If I perceive you investing a higher level of effort than me, this may prompt me to increase my efforts in order to keep the effort contributions to the joint task equal and fair. Alternatively, if I perceive you investing a lower level of effort than me, then it may prompt me to decrease my own level of effort to avoid being exploited. In line with our intuitions, previous research has shown that people increase their effort in a joint task when they perceive their partner to be investing a high level of effort. So one may speculate that the function of effort matching is to ensure fair distributions of the costs and benefits of joint action and thereby to stabilize cooperation. This conjecture is consistent with prevalent models of reciprocal cooperation, which provide a rationale for fairness based on the idea that the best strategy for maintaining cooperation in an environment where individuals are in competition to be chosen is to share the costs and benefits of cooperation equally. So this line of reasoning leads us to the following two hypotheses. We hypothesize that people are more willing to exert effort when they and their partner share the reward of the joint task equally than when they are separately rewarded. We call this the reward distribution sensitivity hypothesis. Moreover, we hypothesize that this effect is driven by an aversion to effort inequity. To test these hypotheses, we carried out two experiments that implemented modified versions of the effort discounting task developed by Hartman and his colleagues. On this effort discounting task, participants are presented with a series of choices between a no effort, low reward and a some effort, some reward option. The no effort, low reward option is held constant, while the effort requirement and the reward of the some effort, some reward option are independently manipulated. This paradigm makes it possible to quantify the costs people associate with different levels of effort and to investigate how people trade off those costs against monetary rewards. I employed a social version of this task. So participants believe that they are working together with a partner. Specifically, they are led to believe that their partner has to solve a CAPTCHA in order to unlock each trial. Participants observe the process of deciphering the CAPTCHA. Then participants can choose between the two options. And crucially, the effort requirement of the some effort, some reward option is matched with the partner's effort investment. If participants choose the effortful option, they have to produce the required number of key presses. Experiment 1 was designed to test the reward distribution sensitivity hypothesis. To this end, we manipulated the reward distribution of the task. Sometimes participants were rewarded jointly, and sometimes they were rewarded separately. This enabled us to investigate how participants' perception of the reward distribution modulated their decisions about how much effort to invest for various reward values. We predicted that participants would be more willing to exert effort when they shared the reward of the joint task equally than when they were separately rewarded. Furthermore, we manipulated participants' information about the rewards. Sometimes they knew the exact reward value of the round, sometimes they didn't. With this manipulation, we aimed to test an auxiliary hypothesis, which we named the salience of social factors hypothesis. We reasoned that if participants could not perform a cost-benefit analysis based on the effort, costs, and rewards intrinsic to the task, then the effect of the reward distribution manipulation should be greater. So here's the choice data. Each point represents one participant's proportion of effortful choices for each of the two conditions. The joint condition is shown on the y-axis, while the parallel condition is shown on the x-axis. The point on the 45-degree line indicates equality between two measures. That is, the participants' choices did not differ between conditions. You can see that participants choose the effortful option more frequently in the joint condition than in the parallel condition, only when the reward was unknown. We were interested in predicting participants' choices between the effortless and effortful option based on the four conditions. We analyzed the data with Bayesian method. We used a generalized linear model in which the predicted value is described as Bernoulli distributed around the linear combination of categorical predictors mapped to a probability value with a logistic function. So we used a non-committal broad prior on the parameters so that the prior had minimal influence on the posterior. For all analyses reported here, we use the same method to estimate the parameters. Specifically, we use Markov chain Monte Carlo techniques to generate representative credible values from the joint posterior distribution of the parameters. The results showed that participants chose the effort flow option more in the joint condition than in the parallel condition when the reward was unknown, while they chose the effort flow option more in the parallel condition than in the joint condition when the reward was known. Specifically, when the reward was unknown in the joint condition, participants chose the effort flow option with a 91% probability, while in the parallel condition, they chose the effort flow option with a 86% probability. So this provides qualified support for the reward distribution sensitivity hypothesis. When people know that their partner has invested a certain amount of effort, their willingness to exert an equivalent amount of effort depends on whether they share the reward of the joint task equally or they are separately rewarded. The results also provide support for the salience of social factors auxiliary hypothesis, suggesting that the influence of social factors may be strongest in situations in which people are prevented from performing a cost-benefit analysis based on the effort costs and rewards intrinsic to the task, possibly because when it is easy for them to perform a cost-benefit analysis, they do so, thereby masking the effects of social factors. So if you know that your partner has invested an equivalent amount of effort, why would this make you more willing to invest effort? One possibility is that people base their decisions about effort investment upon preferences for fair distributions of effort cost. Effort matching serves to ensure fair distributions of the costs and benefits of joint action, and thereby to stabilize cooperation and ensure that one is an attractive partner for future interactions. In so doing, it may help to stabilize people's motivation to contribute to mutually beneficial joint actions. But the findings from experiment 1 are not conclusive in this respect. Specifically, they don't rule out the alternative explanation that participants might have invested more effort in the joint condition simply because they found acting together for shared rewards intrinsically more rewarding. If the social context in experiment 1 elicited a preference for acting together for shared rewards, then participants should not differentiate between different levels of a partner's effort investment. In contrast, if the effect observed in experiment 1 reflects a preference for fair distributions of effort costs, we should expect participants to differentiate between different levels of a partner's effort investment. Experiment 2 was designed to test this. So while experiment 1 manipulated participants' knowledge of the reward values of the options, experiment 2 was designed to disrupt the process of carrying out a cost-benefit analysis based on effort costs and rewards intrinsic to the task by withholding information about the exact effort costs. To achieve this, participants were presented with a series of choices between a fixed small effort option and a random but more effortful option. The fixed small effort option was always worth 1 point, while the value of the random but more effortful option was always worth 2 points. Like in experiment 1, each trial consisted of a capture phase, followed by a round of the effort discounting task. So the aim of experiment 2 was to test whether participants differentiate between different levels of a partner's effort investment. Specifically, participants performed the social effort discounting task in 2 separate conditions in which the rewards were kept constant and relatively low: the high perceived effort condition and the low perceived effort condition. We predicted that if the effect observed in experiment 1 reflects a preference for fair distributions of effort costs, we should expect participants to invest more effort in the high perceived effort condition than in the low perceived effort condition. In contrast, if the social context in experiment 1 elicited a preference for acting together for shared rewards, then participants should not differentiate between different levels of a partner's effort investment. Due to the pandemic, the analysis presented here must be regarded as provisional insofar as they are based on a partial sample. So here's the choice data. Each point represents one participant's proportion of effortful choices for each of the 2 conditions. The high perceived effort condition is shown on the y-axis, while the low perceived effort condition is shown on the x-axis. Again, a point on the 45-degree line indicates equality between the two measures. That is, when the participants' choices did not differ between conditions. You can see that participants chose effort flow option more frequently in the high perceived effort condition than the low perceived effort condition. And again, we were interested in predicting participants' choices between the less and more effort flow option as a function of experimental conditions. So we analyzed the data with Bayesian methods, and we used the generalized linear model similar to the previous experiment. So the results showed that participants chose the more effortful option more in the high perceived effort condition than the low perceived effort condition. Specifically, in the high perceived effort condition, participants chose the more effortful option with a 63% probability, while in the low perceived effort condition, they chose the more effortful option with a 52% probability. An important thing to notice is that in the high perceived effort condition, participants chose the more effortful option above chance level. That is, the 95% highest density interval excludes 50% probability. In contrast, in the low perceived effort condition, participants chose between the two options at chance level. That is, the 95% HDI includes 50% probability. The results confirm the effort inequity aversion hypothesis. So that is, when people share the rewards of the joint task equally and they perceive their partner's effort investment, they base their decisions about effort investment upon preferences for fair distributions of effort costs. In order to scrutinize participants' decision-making at a more fine-grained level, we also examine the decision times in the different conditions. Decision times in seconds are shown on the x-axis, while their density is shown on the y-axis. The blue curve represents the distribution of data points for different decision times in the low perceived effort condition, while the red curve represents the distribution of data points for different decision times in the high perceived effort condition. Previous research has shown that self-paced decision times can reveal the strengths of preference. Fast decisions occur when people clearly prefer one option to another. In contrast, when multiple options are similarly attractive, people tend to be slower. This means that decision time reveals the computational process of evidence accumulation. The decision maker acquires information until there is sufficient to make a choice, and when the options are close in value to each other, this process unfolds more slowly. We reason that if the perception of a partner's effort influences how participants value their options, then we should expect participants to make decisions with different speed depending on the experimental condition. So again, we analyze the data with Bayesian method, and we use the generalized linear model in which the predicted value is described as exponentially modified Gaussian distribution around the linear combination of categorical predictors. And the results showed that participants made decisions more slowly in the high perceived effort condition than in the low perceived effort condition. Specifically, in the high perceived effort condition, participants made decisions in 433 milliseconds, while in the low perceived effort condition, they made decisions in 363 milliseconds. One possible explanation for this pattern of results is that participants consider the options to be closer in value in the high perceived effort condition than in the low perceived effort condition. This suggests that indeed, the perception of a partner's effort influences participants' motivation and processing. So experiment 1 confirmed the reward distribution sensitivity hypothesis. That is, people are more willing to exert effort when they share and when they and their partner share the reward of the joint task equally than when they are separately rewarded. Moreover, experiment 1 confirmed that the salience of social factors auxiliary hypothesis, and it provided inconclusive support for the effort inequity aversion hypothesis. Experiment 2 confirmed the effort inequity aversion hypothesis. That is, people calibrate their effort level in joint actions to match that of their partners to ensure fair distributions of effort costs. So it would be nice to get ideas to overcome the limitations of the experiment. For example, one important limitation of the experimental design is that many participants reached or approached the maximum number of effortful choices. This ceiling effect may to some extent have mask the effects of social factors we manipulated. So to improve upon this in future research, one possibility would be to increase the required effort contributions such that participants are less willing to choose the effort for option. However, it must be noted that this would also increase the duration of the experiment. And with the present design, the maximum duration already approached 1 hour. And moreover, in experiment 2, we attempted to implement such a refinement by increasing the average number of repeated key presses, but nevertheless observed many participants near the ceiling. One may speculate that some participants are in fact committed to the experimenter and that they construe their effort investment not in the context of their joint action, but in the context of the participant-experimenter relationship. Investigation of this conjuncture may provide a valuable avenue for future research. And it is crucially important to emphasize that the results of experiment 1 and 2 cannot be explained by social learning. That is, by the notion that participants use their partner's effort investment as a cue to the value of the task, and for this reason calibrate their effort level according to that of a partner. To see why, consider the following. Findings from research on social learning show that people integrate social information according to its reliability. In experiment 1, we ensured that participants understood that their partner's effort investment and the reward value of the task were independent, making their partner's investment unreliable as a cue to the value of the task. In experiment 2, we kept the partner's effort investment and the reward value of the task independent. And in addition, we also fixed and explicitly stated the reward value of the task on each trial to prevent participants from using their partner's investment as a cue to the value of the task. In view of these design features, it is difficult to see how social learning could explain the pattern of social effort matching observed in experiment 1 and 2. However, it remains an important question for future research to investigate the boundary conditions of effort matching driven by fairness or social learning. And thanks for your attention, and I would like to thank the support of my 2 supervisors and the zombie group at CU. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcell, for this super interesting talk. Now we're opening the floor again for questions. If you have questions, you can raise the participant's hand. I'll try to see if you are actually raising your physical hand as well, or you can also write your question down in the chat. And Marcell, could I ask you to lower your screen, to stop sharing the screen so that I can see everyone's faces? And Michael Schmidt, or Michael Smith, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name exactly. You have a question, so go ahead. So, try to unmute your microphone first.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the talk. I was just wondering, what do you think would happen if you have like a mixed condition, in the sense that you have both like a bonus or a reward for the group, as well as individual rewards, which I think is a structure that you often find in the real world, like say in a company, you know, there might be a team bonus, and also there might be a bonus for individual outstanding contributions to the goal or something like that. So do you have any idea what consequences this would have in the kind of scenarios that you've been studying?
Well, what we observed is that whenever they actually know the exact reward value that they can get out of the task, and they also know the exact effort that they need to exert in order to get that outcome, then they just do that cost-benefit analysis, and they don't pay attention to the social factors around them. So I would expect that. So if there are uncertainties about these just intrinsic costs and benefits, I would expect them to do social effort calibration. But if there aren't, then I wouldn't.
So you think So the collective reward wouldn't make any difference then, you think?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think that this experiment actually helps us to explain that question. But it's an interesting question.
So I have a question that I will then insert myself here to ask. So I've seen evidence that there are some cultural variations with respect to, say, for example, inequity aversion in different cultures and different groups. I was wondering if some kind of similar cultural variation could be expected for effort calibration and effort matching. And so I was wondering which participants, what's the background of the participants, and if you have thought about the possibility of cultural variation in these results.
Yes, that's a great question. So my participant pool are the students from the CEU. So actually their ethnic and cultural background is quite diverse, since they come from all over the world to study here. But I would say that it's it qualifies as a weird population. And yeah, we were also thinking of what, so whether there are these cultural differences could be observed in terms of effort, collaboration of joint action, but we have not done any study on that. And actually, we don't have any specific predictions with regard to how this social effort collaboration should be dependent on different cultures. So if you have any specific predictions, then I would like to hear that.
Yeah, I would imagine that cultures in which so less individualistic cultures than, let's say, Western European or like weird cultures, then there would be maybe less of a tendency to try to match the effort of the other. But I wouldn't know in which direction the others would go. Maybe they would be willing to exert even higher efforts, regardless of what their partners are doing, or they would just defect, regardless of whether the other participant is doing high efforts. So I wouldn't know which way the other cultures would go.
Yeah, and actually, honestly, so what the mechanism that I would like, I'm trying to find is, I hope to be much more basic. So that is an evolutionary. So it's, and I would hope to find it even if in infants as well. So my hope is that it's not dependent on culture exposition, but that's my working assumption. Hope.
Interesting. Oh, sorry, I was saying that Ring Bill has a question, or Bill Ring. If you want to say it out loud, you can do that, or if you want, we can read it, whichever way you want.
Yeah, so I was wondering about what happens when you have unequal distribution of the reward. So if you've got a situation where you're rewarding people collectively, but in a situation where we know that's going to be divided unequally, I guess it'd be interesting to know, do people just have a preference for equitable distribution of effort, or do they have a preference for proportional distribution of effort, so that, if you're getting twice as much reward, you're expected to put in twice as much effort? Is that something that would be is that something that would be able to be experimentally investigated? And if you were to investigate it experimentally, what might you expect to find?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we hypothesize that what they actually want to do is to have a proportional contributions with regard to effort and rewards, and I would expect that if they don't share the rewards equally, they have a different proportion, then they would contribute their effort investments in proportion to the expected rewards. And we will like to have a follow-up experiments when we would test this prediction. Yeah. Yeah, and so we just wanted to start with the most simplest and maybe most robust, the largest difference, having equal share distribution and being not having a share distribution at all. Because we also don't actually know how precisely we can perceive others' effort and how we can compare their effort contributions to our own.
Okay, thanks. That's great.
So Alessandro, you have a question?
So thanks. This was fascinating. So I'm thinking of cases of joint actions where there is no group reward, if at all. So let me make let me give you a personal experience. Okay, so it's a little bit embarrassing to say that, but so during the lockdown, I realized that I was eating much too much and drinking much too much. So I decided to join one of those YouTube live videos where you do physical exercise with somebody else. All right. And as it happens, you might frame that kind of scenario as a sort of joint action where you all do, you just follow the exercise of, of the guy on YouTube. But the point is, at some point I realized that simply watching this guy putting effort on the video motivated me to, do more. But was clear to me from the outset that the kind of reward that I was looking for is entirely individual or personal. I didn't care about all the millions of people who were watching the video, and I wasn't paying any attention to the reward that the trainer on the YouTube might get from all that. So it was just a way of using that person as a social tool. So simply perceiving the guy putting effort motivated me into. So I was wondering whether, what is it that I'm wondering now about? Is this something that is compatible with what you have found? Is something that, it's just my personal report and my personal experience, or is this something that you might find, or you might expect to find across, a population?
As your experience is very much in line with what we hypothesize and what you want to find. And so you had this question, is the question that you have not been observed by others, you just was observing another guy doing an exercise and still it made you be more motivated doing that exercise. And we actually hypothesize that this influence of others' effort is due to so there's a reputational effect underlying this. So, and in a follow-up study, we would like to find whether if we increase the reputational stake of the participants, then they should do a much more precise effort matching. So that the partner's effort should influence them much more. So, but also we also can imagine that it's a much, now the proximal psychological mechanism does not actually need an awareness of how many others are watching you. So it's,
thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, Anna, you have a question.
Hey, thanks for the talk. That was really interesting. I don't want to downplay the influence of effort, but I'm still asking myself, if I'm listening to all the examples, whether we sort of ignore cases where the effort doesn't count. So there are some goals in my life which are more important than calculating about any effort stuff. So if it's going about my life, or if it's something very valuable and something like that, maybe we could have expanding the theory and saying that in some cases, effort does not play a role, and all this effort representations as well. And having said this, I would love to know how you as an empirical scientist could test this, whether this is true.
so that's a great question. So you have in mind any goals that you just wouldn't count the effort that you contributed because just you wanted that outcome so much. Well, I cannot think of a good experimental task that would put participants in a situation that they want that outcome so much.
I mean, if John and me, we are running for our lives and we are dependent on each other because we can only run together because we are with some chains together or something like that, then it should be the case that both of us, we do not care how much effort the other one puts in or how much effort I put in. The only thing what motivates us is the goal to run away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the same. Yeah, that there are circumstances when actually we just don't care about it as effort, and we put our maximum. Well, we certainly we can have a study when they have to imagine that they are running for their life with their partner, and then they have to do some task on the screen, and then we should expect them then the effort matching behavior that they exhibit without that life-threatening situation that would disappear. That would be interesting to see. That, okay. But that's my expectation, that the nature of the task should influence their effort matching behavior. Yep.
John, do you want to jump in?
You have to unmute yourself.
Right, classic. Just to follow up on that, I think that would generate the prediction that if the reward is so valuable that it's just obviously worth the effort, that then we shouldn't bother doing the cost-benefit analysis, and we shouldn't register or remember accurately how much effort we invested, because the whole point of keeping track of the effort would be to determine whether or not it's worth it. But if it's so obviously worth it, then don't bother processing the information. That could be tested experimentally.
Okay, well, thanks very much to Marcell for this super interesting talk.
Thank you.
I definitely want to talk more later about all of your work. But now let's move on to our third presentation of the symposium. And this presentation is in charge of Olle Blomberg. And Olle is a senior research fellow at the Department of Philosophy, Linguistics, and Theory of Science at the University of Gothenburg. He has written on a number of topics in social ontology, including shared goals and shared intentions, common knowledge and shared agency, and collective intentionality and collective responsibility. And the floor is yours, Olle. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. So yeah. So in this talk, I'm going to explore or discuss the relation between effort and praiseworthiness, primarily, but also blameworthiness in the instances of both individual and collective action. And I should say, I'm going to start by sort of apologizing. So Juan Pablo kindly asked me almost a month ago to sort of contribute to the symposium, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to work out what effort is and how it's related to some of the topics I'm interested in: collective responsibility, collective action. And at that time, a month seemed like a lot of time, but for various reasons, I haven't been able to work much on this. So I apologize for the sort of half-baked or quarter-baked status of the content. But hopefully it can sort of stimulate some thoughts, and you can have fun poking holes in what I say. So anyway, that's all the, okay, that's all the self. So actually I don't know how to, okay, yeah. Okay, so here's the agenda. I will say something very briefly, and I should say I'm not going to draw on any empirical work here. This will be kind of armchair folk psychology, moral philosophy. But I'm going to briefly, just to get us on the same page, say something about quality will and praise and blameworthiness, and then just point out the sort of ambiguity about how we use the word effort, and I will try to connect it to a distinction, a sort of precise and very interesting distinction that Olivier makes between first and second order efforts in his paper towards the definition of efforts. And then I will suggest a kind of thesis about the relationship between effort and praiseworthiness. So I will mainly talk about praiseworthiness, but I think everything I say will also generalize to blameworthiness. Yeah, so I think that an agent's accumulated efforts directed towards some end will increase the degree of her praiseworthiness for bringing that end about. So it's a very simple kind of relationship, but I guess the sort of unique suggestion here with respect to other discussions in the literature on this is that it's the accumulation of effort that's important here. So I'm really not sure. I think the relationship will have to be much more complex, and there has to be lots of qualifications to this. But I think something in this direction is true. So and then there's this discussion whether effort is just a kind of indicator of something else, some underlying factor that increases people's praiseworthiness or blameworthiness for bringing about some end, or whether it's a kind of direct factor that influences praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. And I will suggest, contrary to what I think most people who've written about this, that it's a direct factor that influences, it's a factor that directly influences praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. And then at the end, I will come to the kind of group cases and suggest that, well, there's a straightforward analogous relationship between the effort that a group exerts and the degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness that they deserve for bringing some end about. And finally, I think in highly sort of interactive collective activities, participants will perform many interpersonal efforts. So sort of strivings directed at the strivings of others to achieve some goal. And this is interesting because I think it leads to a sort of like a responsibility gap between the group level and the individual level, in the sense that you can't just kind of aggregate the degree of praiseworthiness that each individual participant, you can't aggregate each individual participant's praiseworthiness for their own action in order to get the degree of collective blameworthiness of the group for the joint action, because all participants or several participants will strive, will make sort of efforts that contribute to the degree of praiseworthiness that each individual contribution contributes to the collective degree of praiseworthiness. So basically it's kind of the sum is larger than the collective is larger than the sum of its parts, something like that. So we can discuss this later and sort it out. Anyway, so I'm sort of following in a broadly Strawsonian, Peter Strawson tradition here. So I take it that an agent is praiseworthy for intentionally bringing about some good end. If this action of bringing this end about manifests her goodwill, and I won't take a stand here on what exactly goodwill is. So some people think it's the intrinsic desires of the agent, her cares, or maybe her judgment about normative reasons or character traits, something like that. So the idea is that the extent to which the action manifests or expresses this goodwill, to that extent the agent is praiseworthy. And similarly with blameworthiness, if it manifests the agent's bad will or maybe indifference to valuable things, then she's blameworthy for that action and to that extent. So, you know, if someone steps on my foot in the subway, she will be blameworthy if this action manifests an intrinsic desire to see me suffer, for example, but not if it's just an accident. So that's the idea. And now I think that goodness and badness can be relative to various domains. So it can be moral, aesthetic, athletic, and so on. And praiseworthiness and blameworthiness can come in degrees. Obviously, the sort of seriousness of the outcome, if it's really good or really bad, will make a difference to the degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. But then the idea here is that effort can also be one factor that influences the degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. Right. Okay, so let's look at effort then. So, I mean, I just want to point out that there's a kind of ambiguity in our use of the word effort. So sometimes it just means an action that you perform toward a goal, which is typically a physical action or bodily action. So, for example, so I was looking at sort of discussions in the literature on collective action about that related to effort and in the philosophical literature. And so in John Gardner's Reasons for Teamwork, for example, he says the following: each makes his or her effort in common with the others, and the product is a further effort made by a distinct agent, the team. Now here, and sort of the context makes this clear, that the efforts here is just the contributions of the individuals, and the effort of the team is just the sort of the collective action, the joint action. So when we use the word this way, it's just typically a physical action. But we sometimes talk about the effort with which we perform an action as well. And here it seems like this is typically some mental action that's directed at this first order physical action. And I think so. Olivier in this paper that I mentioned, he sort of I think nicely unifies these different senses of effort. So according to his proposal, an effort is an exertion of force in order to reach some goal. So an effort is a propulsive action, but then we can distinguish between first order efforts and second order efforts. So first order efforts are striving against physical resistance. Second order efforts are striving against aversions to the unpleasantness of first order efforts. And one way of sort of demonstrating the need for this distinction was so Wayne in his talk mentioned that if you compare a child and an adult that performs exerts the same force to do something, lift something, for example, it doesn't seem like they perform or they don't make the same effort in this case. And here effort refers to this second order striving or struggling to exert this force. And from now on, so when I talk about effort, I mean these second order efforts, these mental actions, typically mental actions that's directed toward these first order efforts or actions. Right. So my suggestion then is the following. So I mentioned this earlier, formulated something somewhat differently. So I call this accumulated effort. An agent's degree of praise or blameworthiness for intentionally bringing about some end, E, is increased by, well, first of all, her exerted efforts directed at actions that are supposed to bring about this end, as well as by past accumulated efforts that's directed toward ends of this type, which has made it easier for her to bring about this end at the moment. So make it less effortful. Now, why should one believe that something like this is true? So I should mention that it has to be more complicated. It has to be sort of relative to some standard when you're performing the action and so on. But yeah, we can discuss this in the Q&A maybe. Now, why should we believe accumulated effort? Now, consider some cases from Kelly Sorensen, a paper by Kelly Sorensen, where he distinguishes between two cases. So you have, in one hand, you have Jeanette who donates $100 to UNICEF to help disadvantaged children. Nigel donates $100 for the same reasons to UNICEF. And these are the reasons that make the action right. Now, the difference between Jeanette and Nigel is that Jeanette, she's a very generous person. She donates this money effortlessly. She has no selfish inclinations. Whereas Nigel, he has these very strong selfish inclinations that he has to overcome in order to do this thing that he thinks is right. So there's a lot of inner turmoil, and he has to exert a lot of effort. So Sorensen doesn't use these cases to sort of argue for accumulated effort, but uses it to kind of well, suggest that there's a kind of puzzle here because it seems, and I agree with Sorensen intuitively, it seems that both the kind of effortlessness with which Jeanette brings this end about of donating the $100 and the great effort that Nigel has to exert to do this thing. Both these things seems to increase their praiseworthiness for performing this action relative to some sort of person who exerts average amount of effort, sort of averagely generous, and they happen to be in circumstances where it's easy to donate $100 to UNICEF. So the idea here is that, so there's this puzzle here. Now it seems to me that if we focus on sort of accumulated effort, we can capture this these intuitions. So suppose we find out that Jeanette was just born with very generous dispositions. She has never had to make any kind of struggle or striving to counter selfish inclinations. So she hasn't developed a virtue of generosity herself. It's just something that she was born with. Then it seems like we would no longer take the effortlessness of Jeanette's donation to be something that increases praiseworthiness. So yeah, that's so this is one sort of reason to think that accumulated effort is true, or something in the ballpark anyway. Okay, so, and of course there might be other explanations for these intuitions, but this is one possible explanation. Now, in the literature on praiseworthiness and blameworthiness, I think so. Effort sometimes comes up, or sometimes people talk about difficulty instead. And yeah, anyway. So, but people typically think that effort is just a kind of indicator. It's something that gives evidence of something else that's relevant for praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. So Nomi Arpali and Timothy Schroeder, for example, they think that exerted effort, exerted effort that's required kind of enables a higher degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness, because it makes it possible to manifest a stronger intrinsic desire for the good or for the bad. But here it's the stronger intrinsic desire that's the real kind of factor that influences praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. And Kelly Sorensen himself, he thinks that effortlessness and effortfulness, so the Jeanette and the Nigel case, these things are sort of important evidence because they reveal something about robust traits or psychological states of the agent, which then makes the agent more praiseworthy. But there's nothing about the effort itself which is directly relevant to praiseworthiness. And somewhat similarly, Maslen, Savulescu, and Hunt, in a very recent paper, they suggest that, well, effort is one kind of depletable resource among many that can reveal that agent prioritizes an end, and that she has made a costly commitment to bring this end about. But here it seems that, at least as I read it, is this prioritization and the costly commitment that's really the important factor, not the effort itself. now it seems to me, and this is really an idea I'm just trying out, but it seems that effort can also directly influence praiseworthiness or blameworthiness, because it's something that's up to the agent. It's a matter of the agent's active agency. And we can consider a kind of another contrast case to Jeanette and Nigel. Let's call her Sleepy Jeanette. And she's exactly like Jeanette. So she has the same intrinsic desires for the good. She has the same generous traits. But suppose that she's just very tired and she has to strive and struggle more to make her donation. It seems to me that it's perfectly possible that she'd have to strive like this, and she would do it even though there's no difference in her intrinsic desires for the good or her character traits or something like that. And it seems like this would make her more praiseworthy for performing this action. So, if this is right, then accumulated effort will be an important historical factor for the degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. And so this is in contrast to things like your desires, your judgments about normative reasons, your character traits and so on, which doesn't seem to be, they're not historical facts in the same way. There might be other historical factors that influence the degree of blameworthiness or praiseworthiness, like whether you've been manipulated, and that's why you have certain desires or make certain normative judgments. But accumulated effort seems to be one such historical factor at least. Okay, so my idea then is that this sort of relation between effort and praiseworthiness just generalizes to the collective case. So a group's degree of praise or blameworthiness for jointly intentionally bringing about some end, E, which is good or bad, is increased by the group members' exerted efforts directed toward actions directed toward this end, as well as by their past accumulated efforts directed toward ends of this type, which has made it easier to effortlessly bring it about now. So, the idea is just that, if you're very skilled and you've been training in a team for a long time, this might increase praiseworthiness when the joint action is done more effortless, so to speak. Right. So so what I want to suggest here is that there's an interesting kind of feature of at least some collective cases of collective action, where a lot of the efforts will be interpersonal ones. So in the individual case, normally the efforts that you make will be mental actions, the struggling and striving that you engage in order to perform your individual kind of first order actions. But in group cases, many of these efforts will be interpersonal. So they will be directed not at the striving, your own strivings to contribute to the goal, but to other participants striving toward the goal or end E. So, consider different cases. So on the one hand, you have a relay running race. So suppose the participants in the team, they come together for the first time. And here there's no kind of there's no interaction between the participants, or very little. There's no there are no interpersonal efforts to ease the striving of the others in performing their parts. So the degree of praiseworthiness for the team for winning the race, for example, will just be in sort of aggregation of the degree of praiseworthiness of each individual for performing their parts. Now contrast that with a case of a team effort in a tug of war, for example, where there's a lot of coordination between the participants on the team, and there will also be interpersonal efforts to ease or further the striving of other participants in the team. So suppose you're on this team and you sort of scream, "Ah, come on!" This is not just an action that's directed at your own effort to win the game, but also toward the effort. And now I mean effort in this other sense, directed at the actions of the other participants in the team. Right. So the very, very sort of tentative idea I have here is that because of the efforts to coordinate and to ease the strivings of the others in the team in at least some collective activities, these very interactive ones, the degree of praiseworthiness that each individual action contributes to the degree of collective praiseworthiness for the joint action is not aggregative. So all contributes to the degree of praiseworthiness that each part of the collective action contributes to the whole. That's the idea. And I just want to point out then that in these kind of contexts, in the context of these types of collective activities where there's a lot of coordination required, if participants have shared or joint intentions according to sort of standard accounts, then we can expect individuals to perform these interpersonal efforts. So efforts not only directed to their own actions, but those of the others as well. So for example, if we take Michael Brantman's intention condition, we each have intentions that we J, and we each intend that we J by way of each of our intentions that we J and by way of subplans that mesh. If you have this structure of intentions, or if you have a joint commitment according to Gilbert's or Raimo-Tuomela's account, for example, then there will be a kind of rational pressure on each to perform interpersonal that we J directed efforts, where this is not just the kind of first order contributions, but also these second order contributions. Okay, I've been going on for way too long now. So the conclusions then, super tentative, but anyway, is that accumulated efforts increases an agent's or group's praise or blameworthiness for bringing about some good or bad NDE. And this is a historical factor, not merely evidence of underlying traits or states that contribute to this praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. And in the group case, efforts are often interpersonal physical actions. So the efforts of many can increase the degree of praiseworthiness that an individual action contributes to the group's degrees of praiseworthiness for the good joint action, or blameworthiness if it's bad joint action. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thanks very much, Olle.
Thank you.
Thank you for the super thought-provoking presentation. Now we have 10 more minutes to discuss, because after that we have to get out of this room. So yeah, so you know the deal. You can raise your hands either physically or I guess digitally, or you can write down your question in the comment box. Olivier wants to start. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Oli. That was really interesting. There's many things I wanted to ask, but one of them is this about the contrast between Jeannette and I forgot the other name.
I do. Yeah, I don't know why.
So I was wondering whether here the contrast is not even more deeper than what you suggested, because it seems to me when we say Janet, who is doing this generous action effortlessly, the basic locus of the evaluation, of the praiseworthiness evaluation, is really on the person, on Janet herself, more than on her action. So it seems, I mean, this is just a rough intuition, but it seems to me that in that case, her action is just a sign, a symptoms of who she really is. And this, in the end, this is really some kind of admiration that we direct at the person. While in the case of Michael, it's rather the reverse. So it's really, we do not really care about who he is. I mean, given who he has to make effort to be generous. But what we really value, what is ultimately praiseworthy in that case, seems to be his action. I mean, yeah, I don't know if you share that intuition and how you can account for that and accumulated model.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, that would be another way of sort of accommodating these somewhat the sort of puzzle that case generates. So, or those cases generates. So you might think that it's just we just need to keep apart two different kinds of praiseworthiness. Maybe, I mean, that there's different. I mean, yeah. So David Shoemaker has this this account of quality of will that's kind of pluralistic. So there's the kind of character trait type of quality of will, and then there's a type of quality will that you can exhibit in your choices, for example. So so I think that's possible, but I guess my intuition is that even, I mean, so we're talking about the praiseworthiness for bringing about the outcome. And it seems even in that case, I mean, if we hold that fixed, but maybe this is difficult to do in reality, but it seems like if we're interested in the praiseworthiness for the action, the relation between the agent and the action will be something that influences the praiseworthiness. And one such relation will be between the character traits of the agent and the action. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but
well, that sounds very plausible. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So,
oh, sorry. I was just seeing that Anna has a question.
Hi, Olle.
Hello. Hi.
Good.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. I was a little bit confused. So if I take you totally seriously, then I have to claim that an expert killer is less blameworthy for killing a person than, for example, me, who would take a lot of effort to kill somebody. And the other way around, I was wondering whether somebody is an expert, like the person who does not need that much effort to do a donation. Why this should be less praiseworthy in the same line. So introducing experts, how do you see the relationship in between effort and worthiness? And would you maybe claim that being an expert already involves a lot of effort historically?
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, that's why I brought in the sort of accumulated effort. But what you said about the contrast you made between the expert killer and you I mean, it's precisely the same kind of contrast, I think, as between Nigel and Jeanette, but it's about blameworthiness instead.
Mm.
Of course, it will matter why it requires a lot of effort from you. But if you have to strive and struggle a lot to kill because you have this moral inclination, might be bad, then yes, I think you're less blameworthy for the kill. I mean, you're still morally responsible, but the degree of praiseworthiness will be affected. And similarly with the expert killer who sort of trained themselves over time to disregard such moral inclinations will be more blameworthy.
So you would say that the killer is in the end having more efforts to kill people than I do?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm not sure that's right actually, but yes, that's yeah, yes, that's right.
Okay, maybe we better don't get experts.
Yeah, maybe that's true. And so, sorry, I don't know if there was more in your question. There was probably more things there, but that's the idea, that accumulated efforts is what matters. So the expert will have accumulated more effort.
And I would still believe that there are cases which have no efforts or nearly no efforts and still are very, very blameworthy.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I'm not saying that this is the only factor that influences blameworthiness. So absolutely. So
we have to sort of wage which one is counting out which one.
Yeah.
And only focusing on effort doesn't help.
No, I mean, I think effort is one factor. Accumulated effort is one factor.
And what are the others?
Well, sorry if I can interrupt here. There's a couple more questions. This is super interesting. Maybe we can continue this conversation later on at 7 p.m. in the, I guess, social hour, happy hour. I'm not sure how to call it. But so Robert Williams, yeah, you have a question. I don't know if you want to read it out loud or say it out loud, or you can read it as well.
Yeah, I could speak it. Yeah, so I was just interested in the conditions under which we'll count past efforts towards the accumulated effort. So imagine if you had two people moving a piano, so I was helping out my neighbor, the more strength, the more kind of effort I have to put in, the more praiseworthy I'll be. But somebody might have done kind of practice piano lifting or strength training in the past, and it'll be easier for them, but that'll still count as accumulated efforts, is one thought. But then there's kind of, I was wondering about cases where, you know, they'd done weight training, but it was for aesthetic reasons rather than for helping out neighbors lifting piano reasons. So the kind of intentions when doing the training are kind of unrelated to this. Do you have a sense of when those past efforts will count towards the accumulation and when they won't? What the rules for that would be?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I mean, I did think about this the other day, and that's why I sort of glossed over it in the slide. I mean, I have this sentence that it's the past accumulated E-type directed efforts, and the question is, I guess, how you determine what the type is here. So is the what was it? Yeah, aesthetic weight training or some kind of aesthetic reasoning. You know, whether they're the same type or not. That's kind of the question, and it's a very good question. I mean, I guess it has to, since it's related to praiseworthiness and blameworthiness, I think the relevant type is something like what kind of value that is sort of realized by these efforts or something like that. I think that would be the relevant criteria, whether it's the kind of efforts that counts toward the accumulation. something like that.
Okay, we have a few more seconds. There's another interesting question by Bill about the possibility of asymmetries between praise and blameworthiness. I think we're not going to be able to get to that, but yeah, because we have to leave now, right, Olivier?
Okay, I will. I can see Bill's question, so I will.
Cool.
We can take 2 more minutes.
Okay. Oh, okay, good. So that's good timing.
Okay, I have to read it. So it looks, okay, so yeah, so Bill thinks that, well, you can all see it. So, yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, I think so that the case that Anna kind of raised with the expert killer and someone who's sort of trained to disregard moral inclinations, or just no, sorry, yeah, someone who's kind of yeah. So let's consider the case someone who's just kind of disposed to a psychopath that just kills effortlessly, and someone who has to counter their sort of moral inclinations. Yeah, that's true. It would certainly seem like we would think that the psychopath, intuitively, the psychopath might be more blameworthy. Well, yeah, no, that's actually, I don't have, let's, I have to think about this question. Okay. It's an interesting question.
I'm a bit puzzled because you're mostly considering individual cases.
Yeah.
Where it looks to me that you might get slightly different intuitions about sort of what happens when you think about people working in a team and how to sort of, you know, so Holly Lawford Smith has got this sort of, you know, what I sometimes call the pizza principle. You know, there's a fixed amount of blame.
Yeah.
And you divide it up among the people, you know, and possibly proportionately to their effort. But, you know, you don't have more blame just because there are more people involved.
No, yeah.
That strikes me as really implausible for blame, but not so implausible for praise. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, well, you know, sort of, if you think about sort of lazy conspirator and a murderer and the one that gets it all to happen, it's not really obvious to me that the lazy conspirator, that our intuition is that the lazy conspirator gets off the hook.
No.
And that the industrious one ends up taking more of the blame.
Yeah.
But, you know, if there's a rescue case, it really does look as though the sort of industrious rescuer deserves more of a praise than the lazy one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly right. But yeah, it's interesting that you think the pizza principle doesn't, I mean, I think the group will be praiseworthy for something different than the individuals are.
That's true, but it does look as though something distributes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I was thinking that you could think of the degree of praiseworthiness of the group with respect to the group action, and then you could think of the degree of praiseworthiness of individuals for the contributions, but you could still kind of make comparisons between the degree of praiseworthiness at the group level and the degree of praiseworthiness at the individual level relative to some sort of some kind of scale. But yeah, I don't know exactly what to say, to be honest. I have to think more about this if there's an interesting symmetry. So it's a good
one more path for future investigation and maybe contributions. But now we really have to stop. So I want to thank our speakers and for our great discussion and it's very inspiring. So thank you so much for this. And we'll see each other in other sessions.